what a great conversation. I'm really glad that we end note. This is a great scene setter for our 3 days of conversation. We start with the 1989 generation, but we go all the way to the challenges of AI, China, or liberal democracy. Thank you so much, Dr. Brimmer, Secretary Albright, Professor Garton-Ash. The successes of our common history be a guiding force for the transatlantic community as we address the challenges of the 21st century. Keeping this shared past in mind as we look to the future and to the EU-US Future Forum, we find ourselves at a critical time for the transatlantic relationship as we manage the COVID-19 pandemic and economic competition with China, as well as the ongoing digital transition, the urgent climate crisis. The US and the EU are setting their priorities for the months and years ahead.
Thanks so much, Ben. Every 6 months, an EU member state holds the rotating presidency of the European Union. They are responsible for setting the agenda at the EU institutions and moving these priorities forward. For the past several months, as the Biden administration took office, Portugal ran with an ambitious transatlantic agenda. It is a delight to welcome His Excellency Augusto Santos Silva, the Foreign Minister of Portugal, as we enter month 5 of the country's EU presidency.
Welcome to this session of the EU-US Future Forum with our distinguished guest, His Excellency Augusto Santos Silva, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of Portugal. I am Paul Adamson, Chairman of Forum Europe and founder and editor of Encompass. As you will all know, Portugal currently holds the presidency of the European Union, and Mr. Santos Silva has the responsibility of steering the EU agenda for the first half of 2021. That is not the easiest of tasks among 27 member states in normal times, but even less so under the conditions of a public health and an economic crisis. So we are looking forward to a discussion with the Foreign Minister about framing a transatlantic post-COVID agenda, and hopefully as we move out of the pandemic together with a renewed sense of transatlantic cooperation. And as we start our discussion, please follow along on social media using the hashtag EUFF2021. So Mr. Santos Silva, let's get started. I think I'm right in saying that this is the 4th time that Portugal has held the EU presidency. And I just wonder, when you, like all presidencies, they are prepared years, not just months, but years in advance. So to what extent, what was the impact of the pandemic in the preparations Portugal had to do in preparation for its presidency for this year?
Of course, it was an unexpected event. We are preparing our presidency since 2019, and the pandemic obliged us to make some major transformations, mainly concerning logistics. Of course, we are doing this presidency in a rather virtual way, or with hybrid events, meaning people assisting presentially and people assisting by internet and digital platforms, but also in content. And the main transformation was the pandemic itself and its economic and social effects that have been devastating. So the motto of the Portuguese presidency is time to deliver concrete actions in two main levels. The first level is combating pandemic itself. There, the crucial action is the vaccination process. And the other level is the economic one. We decided last year, the European leaders have decided to put in place a vast funding program to fund recovery. And our obligation as the current presidency is to ensure that the first national plans of recovery and resilience of our economy can be approved next June and can be implemented.
So when you were preparing your presidency, did you have the impression that member states were not acting with as much solidarity as they might, especially in the first month of the pandemic last year? We all know the stories about export controls and the kind of nationalistic, maybe understandable, but still regrettable reflexes that many member states had to look after their own citizens first, to the detriment maybe of their broader European neighbours. Do you think that created a sense of bad blood amongst member states, or is that now well in the past?
Well, I would answer with mixed feelings. On one hand, it is understandable that national states can address first the needs of their own citizens. We have to understand this. We are not a federation of states. We are not a unique federal state. We are a mosaic of 27 different countries. So in a certain sense, we have to expect a certain, I would not say predominance, but a certain importance of national framework and national criteria in launching public policies. But there was a discoordination in the first stage of the pandemic. You are right. But if we compare with the 2010 crisis, the crisis of the sovereign debts in Europe, our response was very swift. Because in the last crisis, the beginning of the last decade, we took 2 years or 3 years to respond collectively to the financial crisis. And now the European Central Bank responded immediately. Then the finance ministers put in place 3 different and complementary programs to support the first response of each member state, and then European leaders last July decided to implement a vast program, meaning more than, I would say, 1.8 trillion euros to fund the European economic recovery in the next 6-7 years.
Okay, there are not very many explicit references to the pandemic in your presidency program, maybe because much of it was drafted earlier on in the process. But I will quote something back to you on page 5 of the program, which says, "We will support the creation of a European health union, strengthening capacity to respond to public health crises and efforts to produce and distribute safe vaccines accessible throughout Europe and the rest of the world." So is that the new mantra of the European Union? Europe has to be more self-sufficient, even if it ends up by showing solidarity with the rest of the world beyond the European Union's borders. One of the lessons of this pandemic is that Europe was too reliant on external suppliers.
Yes, indeed. You are totally right. We need more, what we call more autonomy of Europe. Even sometimes we phrase it as strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy does not mean being more autonomous towards the United States. Strategic autonomous means being more autonomous towards other economic and institutional contexts in relation to which we were too dependent. I mean China, I mean Asia as a whole, because we found that some provision of public goods like medicines, like medical equipments, like masks, for instance, facial masks, were in the provision of these basic goods. We were not autonomous, we were not self-sufficient, we depended too much from other contexts. So our motto of reindustrializing Europe addresses this particular issue, to gain more autonomy for Europe in the supply of some basic critical goods. But on the other hand, the idea of a European Union of health means more coordination and more solidarity. It is easily understandable that the main competences in social affairs, including health, lie with member states. There are national competences. The way you organize your hospitals, the way you organize your healthcare, the way you organize your pension system is mainly a national responsibility. But we need more coordination, so we decided two things. The first one, for the first time, we will have a European program for health, 5 billion that are allocated to European, so Europe-wide programs, meaning, for instance, financial support for member states in improving their healthcare capacities. And secondly, we are establishing more responsibilities for the already existing European agencies. There are two main European agencies in the health domain. The first one is the European Agency for Medicine, the one that is responsible for instance, approving the vaccines. And the other is the European Center for Disease Control, that is the agency that identifies the risks, gives the alarms, and monitors the national response to health emergencies. So these two European agencies will be enhanced during the next months and years.
Right. So the start of your presidency, Mr. Santos Silva, coincided with the start, of course, of the Biden presidency, the new administration. And I think its new administration was widely welcomed in Europe and maybe the rest of the world. That's hardly a secret. But against that backdrop, is there an issue potentially, without being too fatalistic, of too many expectations on either side of the Atlantic? There'll be so much this need and desire to start off where we left off maybe 4 years ago. But in those 4 years where the previous administration in the United States, much has changed. The United States has changed, the European Union has changed. And how easy, from your perspective as Foreign Minister of Portugal, never mind running the presidency of the EU, is it to restart those relations again?
Yes, you know, in politics, there is no such thing as coming back. Past time does not come back. And then when it comes back, it is in a negative way. So the world has changed, America has changed, Europe has changed. But still, the new Biden administration is a very important momentum, both for Europe and for the United States. And if you allow me, I would point out another element that is very important to take into consideration when we approach the relations between Europe and the United States. Because meanwhile, the United Kingdom has left the European Union. Meanwhile, Brexit happened. So we now need a triangle between continental Europe, between the European Union as such, on one side, United Kingdom on the other side, and United States and Canada on the other side. And we do claim as Portuguese that Portugal is in a very important position and a very favorable position to foster this triangular combination. Why? Because Portugal is, of course, a European country, but we are an historic ally of the United Kingdom because we are a European plus Atlantic country. And you perhaps know that we were the second country in the world to recognize the independence of the United States. And we are a strong ally, we have a strong alliance with the United States. But as a foreign minister, I always always draw the attention of my audiences to this fact that we have to combine this triangle the world needs: Europe, European Union, United Kingdom, and the United States. And of course, the spirit, the atmosphere, the stance, and the practical program of Biden administration is a very important insight to this triangulation. Why? Because America is back. America is back to multilateralism. America recognizes again that Europeans and Americans are the closest allies, and this counts a lot, even for the issues in which there are disputes, there are divergences, there are conflicts between Europe and America, like trade or, for instance, digital taxation.
This idea of triangulation, Minister, it's quite rare to hear that concept being expressed. Maybe in these early days of post-Brexit for the UK. But given that it's a new reality, as you sketched out, what are the priority areas in your judgment for action for these in this new triangular world you're talking about?
I would say that the three top priorities, there is a lot to do, of course, but if you choose the three top priorities for this triangulation, I would mention these three priorities. The first one is a clearly multilateral agenda, climate action. We all have to be in contact, cooperate, and support the United Nations efforts to put climate action and the decarbonization of our economies as our common endeavor. Common meaning also the endeavor of China, the endeavor of India, and of course, with the leadership of the European Union and the United States. And as you understand, the fact that President Biden has chosen John Kerry as his special envoy for climate, the call and the organization of the Earth Summit this April, were transformative events and very important events for this multilateral agenda. So, priority number one. Priority number two, a common position or a convergence in what regards our understanding, our assessment of what is now leading the geopolitics and what we have to do in common to face the new trends of geopolitics. Let me be clear. In what terms shall we address and relate to China, Russia, and of course the so-called emergent economies? Priority number two. Of course, we are doing this in the framework of NATO, of course. We are working in the new strategy for NATO, and we have to address the challenges posed by Russian behavior and by the rising influence of China. But we also have to do it in more political or diplomatic frameworks, including in our relation with Africa and Latin America. The way in which we can build a constructive but firm relationship with Russia and with China depends a lot upon the attention we want to give to Africa, to Latin America, or to Asia. Priority number three, the Indo-Pacific region. We have to cooperate, we have to work together in addressing this vast and very dynamic region of the world. You know, for us Europeans, things are very clear. In our forecasts, when we do what we call the foresight, we immediately have to recognize that 85% of the economic growth in the next decade will happen outside Europe. This is the challenge.
Right. Okay. Well, we talked about Europe from the inside. We talked a bit about transatlantic relations, but you very handily helped me to segue into the final part of our discussion, Mr. Santos Silva, about the outside world. You talked about the geopolitics. This is based very much on the premise that the EU and the UK, as you said, and the United States have in broad terms, a common world view. But that, when it comes to China, for example, that, let's be clear, that is not the case, right? The Europeans do not see China at all in the same way as the United States does. The United States, China is a rival, but also maybe an existential rival. So how would you go about trying to find some common ground, especially in respect to China, because that is obviously a very important area between these three different elements of the triangulation you talked about?
Well, if you allow me to compare two American administrations without having any judgment on the internal American politics, but if you allow me to compare two American administrations, I would say that now things are more clear. Why? Because Trump administration, from a European point of view, of course, but from a European point of view, Trump administration seemed more ambiguous or a little ambiguous in the relationship towards Russia, and too much engaged in a zero-sum game in what regarded the relationship with China. And it is very interesting to see in these first 100 days of Biden presidency that President Biden and Secretary Blinken are in no sense they are ambiguous. They are very clear in stating the American policy towards Russia and towards China, but in a certain way they share the European vision, according to which we have to be firm in what regards our red lines, for instance, human rights, for instance, the need to, in the case of China, the need to respect the Deng Xiaoping principle, one country, two systems, the fact that we are systemic rivals in the sense that we have opposite views concerning liberties and institutions. But on the other hand, we need a contact, a communication, and even, if possible, a cooperation in certain areas, both with Russia and with China. With Russia concerning disarmament, concerning non-proliferation. With China concerning, for instance, climate action. You see, I'm using almost the same words President Biden used. So I think there is a real convergence between the European perspective and the American perspective. Until November the 4th, Europeans were always asked to say yes or no, are you following the Americans? Now we are permanently asked or invited to join a partnership in which we also are seen as relevant protagonists. And I think this is a real game changer.
Right. A final question, Foreign Minister, if I may. You're now 2/3 through your 6-month presidency. At the end of the 6 months, what would you hope to be one of your main achievements, and how would you like your colleagues in the EU and even the rest of the world to have viewed your presidency over the first half of 2021?
May I choose 5 results?
Okay.
The first one is already guaranteed. We approved the new agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom concerning trade and cooperation. And you can understand how important this agreement is for Europe and for Portugal, because of all the explanations I already gave in our view of this triangle between the European Union, United Kingdom, and United States and Canada. The second result is almost guaranteed. Europe will have the very first climate law of its history. And this is very important because it will state the binding objectives we are committed to concerning the carbon neutrality in 2050 and the way until there. The third result I expect is not the conclusion of the vaccination process, but the conclusion of its first stage, meaning that the elder people in Europe be already vaccinated. We are almost there, but we are not yet there. The fourth result will be the approval of the first national plans for the recovery of the economy. I think this will be very important as well. And the fifth result will be some progress in what regards the rule of law in Europe. As President Biden very rightly says, the issue of democracy and of the rule of law is not an issue outside. It's not only an issue abroad, an issue in Asia, an issue in China, an issue in Africa, or an issue in Latin America. It's also an issue within our political West. It's an issue internally to the United States, and it is an issue internally to Europe, and we have to address it.
Well, to quote back your program to your foreign minister, you say, ours will be a presidency that is active in building consensus, able to adapt to circumstances and driven by results. We will promote dialogue and the unity of the member states. So clearly you're on the right path. Thank you so much, Foreign Minister. We managed to cover a huge amount of ground in the time available to us. Thank you so much for your time. We're very grateful to you indeed for being with us today. And thanks to all of you out there following our discussion virtually. And now back to my Atlantic Council colleagues.